All right. Well, hello and welcome everyone to this month's deep dive. I'm super excited to get into it. We have a very special guest, Derek, to dive into some amazing things. So this week we're going to be talking about access requests as we start to dive into all the different things around it. This is a super interesting topic because, as you can imagine, there's a lot of different areas that you can think about giving access to different things, making sure it's reported correctly. What does workflow look like? So there's a lot of different nuances that I thought would be super neat to dive into, go a little bit into like how we built it, why we built it, and especially as we think about coming into the end of the year. And you'll also get a kind of a sneak peek, but our next episode, we're actually going to be diving into a left-hand nav updates and navigation. And so we want to just kind of walk through some of those different areas because guess what? We've added a lot of things over the years, and the navigation bar continues to grow and grow and grow. And so we wanted to make sure that it was consolidated across different use cases, as well as some new feature functionality that we're going to be showcasing. So we'll be excited to dive into that in our December episode. And the last thing that I wanted to just quickly note for this group as we start to go through, if you haven't yet, we just opened up registration for JumpCloud Land in February. So this is your official save the date. Come and hang out with us. We're going to have, oh my gosh, I think like 4.5 hours of super interesting content, both
I'm going to
across.
be there. Yep.
Derek's going to be there round two. We're going to have some great speakers. We're going to go both across product, but then also a lot of new IT trends. We have some great research that we're going to be unveiling, kind of going through, especially around how people are using AI in all of your colleagues. And so it's going to be really interesting as we start to dive into some of those different pieces. So come and hang out with us, join us. It's going to be a blast. New theme, everything. It's going to be great. So we can't wait to see you there. And then, so with that, now we're going to get into the meat of the conversation. And so I'm super excited as we start to look at this. How do we want to simplify access requests? What does that look like? How do we make sure that we aren't shooting ourselves in the foot when we are promoting users and making sure that they have access to those different things? And everything's audible, right? You want to understand where that is moving within your organization and how we can get there. So with that, Derek, I'm going to hand it over to you because we got a couple things that we wanted to walk through, and then I'm just going to pepper you with questions, and I'll see if
Absolutely. And so I'm super excited. Everybody should sign up for JumpCloud Land. Just a plug there. I'll be there talking about identity governance and administration. So I'm really stoked about JumpCloud Land coming up. For those that don't know me, my name is Derek Johnson. I am a principal product manager here at JumpCloud. I've been here about 4 years. I work on the platform team and get to focus primarily on orchestration, automation, workflow type use cases. And so today I am super excited to be here with Chase and talking about access requests. And so let's jump into it. What is an access request? Well, first off, we are generally available. So our access request capabilities, everything I'm going to show you right now is generally available for any customer that has a tenant on JumpCloud. And so what is access request? Really what this is about is enabling the end user to self-serve a request for things that an administrator has configured for them to request. And so we'll kind of walk through what that means in just a minute. But to be able to self-serve that request, and based upon how the administrator configures the flow, for it to be routed to different types of approvers. You can see a handful up here, the administrator, a resource owner, requesters manager. It could even be a user group, and I'll show you what that looks like. Or it could be auto-approved, but all of that is configurable. And at the end of the day, what we're really doing is we are granting membership into a user group that then grants access to the resource involved. And so this was a major component. But if you think about everything that user groups can be leveraged for, our primary use case initially was SSO applications, but we really wanted to focus on user groups. And so how does this benefit customers? Well, this is really all about efficiency, security, and compliance. On the efficiency side, we were very focused on reducing admin burden, getting users what they needed to do their job faster, right? From a security perspective, we wanted to remove manual mistakes that are inherent in a lot of access requests processes that customers have, and fewer vulnerabilities in terms of bringing it all within the JumpCloud environment. And then from a compliance perspective, we were very focused on compliance from the very beginning and focused on traceability and documentation of access because we know how important that is from a compliance perspective. So
that is interesting. One quick question as we start to walk through that. We typically think about a lot of this in terms of access requests and kind of like a singular flow. Hey, I want access to the thing, right? Like, let's just like make this a one-to-one kind of transaction, but like communication of access and kind of and how I can get elevated into certain things or get my hands into whatever I might need. But we went through the groups route, right? And so
Yes.
we have lots of different groups within JumpCloud, groups of users, groups of devices, kind of other pieces. And so that might be a little wonky, right? In terms of how you think about what that when I typically ask for food or kind of anything else within my life, right? That has that versus like a group mentality. So I'm curious from your perspective, why did we lean on that as much, or kind of what does
Yeah.
that really unlock for
No,
some
it's a
folks?
it's a great question because when we first started this journey, we thought exactly the way that you described, which is to be very direct. And SSO applications were our hero use case that we were focused on. And as we started to kind of poke at this and understand, how we were going to architect it behind the scenes, what made a lot more sense was to leverage user groups. And the reason why is because it opens up quite a bit in terms of what becomes requestable. And so if you think about JumpCloud and everything that you use a user group for is now in play as it relates to a request flow. So don't just think of SSO applications, think of directories, think of Radius, think of LDAP, think of device groups even. And so it puts a lot of flexibility into customers' hands in terms of how they want to leverage the capability and build different types of requests. One of the things we tested as part of kind of our test pattern whenever we were creating this was the scenario of I want to give someone admin privileges in Google Workspace, right? And so the way that it's configured is we have a user group within JumpCloud that is leveraged to grant access into Google Workspace in an admin role. And the only thing that had to be done on the Google side was to elevate that user group to a security group. And as long as that configuration took place, we could very seamlessly have a request flow through the approval flow. Once the approval decision is made, user group membership happens on the JumpCloud side, and therefore security group membership happens on the Google Workspace side. And I'll show you an example of something that looks like that in the demo. But it's a great question, and I'm always amazed and love hearing about how different customers are using user groups for creative things like that. So
Yeah, no, it's great. And then I think too, you have it up here, and we had a question come in as well, kind of around approval throws and other things. So like we can go through kind of different areas, other pieces. How are we thinking about multi-tier approval flows in
so
terms of?
let's jump into
Yeah,
it because yeah, let's
okay,
go into the demo. Let me stop sharing my screen really fast and switch over to the demo view because I
because I
very
personally
much
wanted to say no to everything, so I'm going to sit across it. If there's no, don't do it.
very much want to get into this.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that's,
All right.
I mean, and while we transition to, I think that's an interesting thing because I think for a lot of us, so much of our day to day is application based. The
Yes.
things that we're conducting this webinar on,
Yep.
my email,
Yep. Yep. Yep.
everything else is very much across that. But then if you think about how much I can turn that into a self-service for, hey, I need a new device. Hey, I'm going into this office. Hey, I need to have some of those other things. The more that we can touch. And then two, I think around our applications, we start to think about
Yeah.
AI agents, all the other fun things that might be coming along. It's really helpful to kind of have that broader approach.
Exactly. No, no, very much so. So to ground everybody, let's talk about where I am because it may look a little bit unfamiliar, as Chase was saying earlier. I am logged in as an administrator in a test account. And the left nav looks different because this is a kind of a preview of what Urvushi's going to come in the next episode and go through. But what I want to do is I want to go over here to this access section and go to access requests. And I want to show you the configuration experience for something that I've already configured. It'll make it easier for us to kind of walk through it. So this is a Salesforce admin access approval flow. And so this enables who I deem appropriate to be able to make a request for Salesforce admin access. So if I go over here to edit, you can see that there's in it, if I kind of zoomed out, it would all be on one page. But the first part is really what do you want to display to that end user, and I'll show you what that looks like from an end user's perspective in just a second. So I give it a name, I give it a description, I use the Salesforce logo, And so this part right here where it says user group assignment and user portal visibility. So the user group assignment was what I was talking about earlier on the previous slide. This is the group that I've already set up that I leverage to manage admin access into Salesforce. So as long as someone is a member of that group, they have admin access to Salesforce and are provisioned into Salesforce with the appropriate role.
Okay. I think one quick thought too while I'm trying
Yeah,
to what's best practices like in terms of talking with our customers if we kind of
great.
go through this in terms of naming, like it should be admin, should we do some other pieces? Like
Great
what's an easy
question.
way for people to think about all these new groups?
So the way that we like to recommend from an access request perspective is what most customers are doing whenever we were doing our discovery is they had a one-to-one relationship between a user group and the particular application or resource that they were wanting to grant access to. And especially when you start getting into roles, the one-to-one relationship becomes even more important because what we don't want to have happen is we don't want you to accidentally provision or give someone access unintentionally by making them a member of a group. And so our natural instinct is to have a bunch of resources associated with a singular group for a particular group of people. And I think what we've done over time is we've tried to give you as much flexibility as possible that if you want to have multiple resources associated with a user group, you can. But our recommendation is that one-to-one relationship. It just makes things cleaner. It makes things easier for you to be able to troubleshoot. Hey, this person has access to this resource. Therefore, how did they get it? And so we want to make it as easy as possible for you. So that's a good
Okay.
question. The second part is this user portal visibility. This is where I decide who can make this request. And in this case, I have a user group called engineering that has a group of users in it. And that's who I deem as appropriate to be able to make this request. And so one of the things that we thought was like really important, and we heard customers talk about during discovery was they wanted full control. They didn't want to just open every request up to everybody. They wanted to be very specific that, hey, only engineers can make this request or only product people can make this request and so on and so on and so on. So this
Mhm.
gives a lot, again, flexibility in terms of who can make a request. This last section here kind of gets to the question that was asked earlier. And so for this particular approval flow, I have the approver type as just resource owner and then Derek Johnson. I have another identity that I'll log in a minute as Derek Johnson, the resource owner. But resource owner is nothing more than a named user within the directory. It can be any user in your directory. It could be someone in security. It could be anyone that you want to name. It could be an administrator. And if you want to make sure that a certain administrator is the approver for a flow, you can name that administrator and they would have to go approve it themselves. And I'll show you what I mean by that in just a minute. So, but if I click the plus button, you can see that different types of approvers start to pop up, right? So here's requesters manager, here's user group. I think the question in chat was if access requires approval from both a direct manager and a department head, what I would do is I would have requester manager, and then I would have department head as the resource owner. Now, I think what you're after really there is hierarchy, and we don't
Mhm.
have that. Like we don't have the capability for you to say, hey, I want I want the requester's manager to be there, and then I want the manager's manager to be there. We don't have that, but we do have one level up in terms of requester's manager. And what we're leveraging there is the manager attribute that is in the directory. So if you go in, it's key that you populate the manager attribute in order to take advantage of this requester's manager as an approver type. And so then if I go down here to this last part, this shows you the ordering in which, like, let's say that I had all three of these that I wanted to use, right? Well, I could say, hey, I only need one approver type. So as long as one of them approves, I don't care, just as long as one of them approves. I could have all approver types, or I could have all approver types sequentially. And so in this scenario, I would have the resource owner, like if I click on all approver types sequentially, it would be the resource owner first, then the requesters manager, then someone from a user group that I've already predefined as an approver. Now, this is a highly complex scenario, But the reason I'm showing it to you is because you have a ton of flexibility into what you would want to do. The way I had designed this one originally was just the resource owner, Derek Johnson, the resource owner, as the approver. And so I'm going to leave it at that. But any questions there, Case? Anything you want to talk about?
I think it's just to make sure that everyone's aligned on some of the mental mapping, because I think we went over three very important concepts, and kind of here's what it looks like in the UI, but then to kind of step back, like, okay, what does this look like? Derek, obviously an amazing product person, right? So he wants access into everything. And so his manager says, yes, he can kind of go in, but because you're not part of the engineering group, you might get blocked, right? So that forces a conversation, right? Even if it's a direct manager, now we're starting to look across different types of groups or kind of models and modes and maybe even different business units. And then I think to get to the last part first, which is kind of how we think about that groups and really giving people the level of granularity based on their group granularity. And so I think that there's kind of like three different options and kind of layers that all come together. So I know you mentioned it's kind of a complex use case, but you can see how that starts to give people a lot of flexibility in terms of who should be approving, who should be having those conversations in the first place. Great, and then you can kind of get into that and get into costs and all the other pieces. But I think that's really helpful for people to kind of like have all those different combined powers at once if they need it, right? And then also too, we can have the easy button, just say, hey, yep, there's
Right.
approved and record, right? And I think that's the other
Right.
piece of just like how we can have some expediency as well.
A couple of things that I didn't point out, Chase. So this is where I would designate something as automatically approved, right? And so if I wanted, for example, that any engineer to be able to request access to Salesforce in an admin role, I don't know why we would want to do that from a security perspective, but let's say I wanted to automatically approve it. All they would do is make the request, and instantaneously they become a member of the user group that is designated above, and therefore they have access to the resource. So you can, if you have resources that you just need the documentation of a request and the auto approval of, and we have resources here at JumpCloud that our IT admins do that for, where they're fine if someone wants access to something, but they're not going to burn the license until they actually need it. And so if you think about that scenario of automatic approval, you're going to have scenarios where you would want to auto approve something. There's also the option to make, let me get rid of these. There's also the option to make the administrator the approver, right? And so one of the things that we if you think about a very simple use case, or if you're not in a very big organization and the administrator is the approver for everything, you have that capability. And what this does is it makes it to where anyone with an admin role or an admin with billing rights role would have the capability to go approve something or make a decision on something. So
yeah. Okay. And I think that answers, I'd say, a couple of questions that are starting to come through the chat of, one, if you don't have a manager, right? If you're CEO and it's like, what's my credit card anyway? It's my company. It's all, automatically approved everything by me. But then also two, if they might not have one either based on role or kind of anything else, then you can set it at that admin level. So you always have kind of a backup, right? Or kind of like that extra layer of approval if you need it.
And to add one more thing, so there was a question around, well, what if that manager attribute, what if the manager leaves the organization and is no longer there, right? So yes, we do alert you that there is a broken flow because this request is in a stagnant state because there's no manager to make that approval. But not only do we alert you as the administrator, but we give you, the administrator, the ability to go in and make that decision and unblock that request if you decide. You can approve it or you can decline it. And you could decline it and then go back and add a new manager for that user if you wanted to do it that way. But you've got the flexibility to do what you want as the administrator in that situation. And I'll show you kind of what that flow looks like, where the administrator comes in and overrides the approval flow.
Okay. Yeah.
So, all right, let's switch over to the end user. And so I wanted to kind of walk you guys through how easy making a request is. And so what we're going to do is I showed you that Salesforce one for admin access. And so if I expand this, you can see that I get to see the approval flow for this request before I make the request. So again, these requests that are on this page are the ones that the administrator has configured me to be able to request. I can't see any other requests, right? I can't see a request to get access to AWS and this group because I haven't been configured to be able to see that request. These are the ones that the administrator has configured for me. But I can see the approval flow, right, ahead of time. So if I want to, I can expedite and I could go find Derek Johnson, the resource owner, and say, hey man, you need to make a decision on my request here so I can get my access. Um,
Yes.
so
And it
if
also
I
might strike fear too. And I think that's really helpful to
go
call
ahead.
out. So in terms of, it sets expectation for the user, right? In terms of, okay, where does this go? What does it need? And then, it could be like filing expense reports or something. So, because if you see, hey, this type of level needs this type of approval, and like, oh, wow, all right, I need to have a really good business case versus just like,
Yes.
I want to throw in some Salesforce
Well,
reports, right?
and what it also does, and so you as the administrator, customers have the ability to hide this if they want to. So if they don't
Okay.
want their end users to be able to see the approval flow, they can hide this. It's up to them, and I think we default it to on from the very beginning, but they have the ability to decide if they want to expose this or not. But one of the things we heard from administrators during discovery was they wanted this, they needed this, because they didn't want to enable you to self-serve a request, and then if something stalls out or you need to expedite, they don't want to be the ones that you're coming to. They want you to be able to know where to go to be able to get someone to be able to make a decision. So it was a critical component of the design. So I'm going to go ahead and kick a request off for this. So if I just click select, we always have to give a reason, right? Need access for a project. And what this explanation or this why do you need access, this answer is going to flow through into the DI event that's associated with this request. And so it'll all be there as part of the documentation and throughout the entire flow. And all I do
We
is
can for a
press continue.
whole bunch of payloads just to say, just because, like I said so.
Well, but if you do that, I can decline you, right? Because you didn't give me a
All
good
right,
enough
so there it
answer,
is.
and then you would have to re-request it again, right? And so I don't know if you noticed it, but there was a little toast success message up at the top that says your request has been submitted. Um, in the background, you've also received an email notifying you that you've made that request. But likewise, the approver has also received an email now saying, "Hey, we need you to go make a decision on this." So you
Okay.
notice this changed a little bit. It changed to yellow now that I've made this request. But what I wanted to show you as well is what this looks like for a more complicated flow. So this is a flow that I have for Google Workspace admin access, kind of the scenario I described earlier. And in this case, I also have an identity called Derek Johnson, the manager. And then I've got Derek Johnson, the resource owner. But what
You're
this
a busy guy.
is I am a very busy person. What this is the requester's manager's name will be here. And then the resource owner that's been assigned to the resource is here. Remember, I showed you if you
Mhm.
use resource owner, anyone that's in your directory, you can name them. Well, I've got a couple of identities just to make it easy for me to manage through. And so you can see what that flow looks like. And in this case, the manager has already approved it, right? And so I'm just waiting for the resource owner to approve it at this point. So I had made this request before we got on the call just to kind of show you guys what that looks like. And we'll circle back to this request later on. But I wanted to show you guys what this looks like so that you kind of get a sense for what a more complicated flow looks like. Okay, so one of the next thing I want to show you is what the approval process looks like for the non-admin approver. So we're going to go focus in on this Salesforce one where we've made this request, right? And that there's a pending request for the resource owner to go in and make that approval. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to log out of here as Derek Johnson, the end user, and I'm going to log back in as Derek Johnson, the resource owner. Excuse all of my identities that I have in here.
Just pick a Derek Johnson.
Yeah,
You will log in.
the man of many identities.
Yes.
Always MFA. So now I'm logged in as the resource owner. And over here, remember before we were in that request tab, that's where we were making requests. Well, I have a tasks tab. And so if I click on tasks, you can see that there are two requests that have been submitted. The one I'm interested in is the Salesforce one because that's the one that we just submitted, right? And so if I expand that out, I am now the approver and I can see who's made the request, what their reason is for the request, who the requester's manager is in case I want that information. I can see what it's for, all the things up there. And it's literally as easy as me going grant access. Okay,
Okay, fine.
go do your work, right? Grant access. Boom, I'm done as the approver. Notice, Chase, that I'm in the user portal, right? Because I'm not an administrator. I am I'm what we refer to as a non-admin approver in this situation.
Hmm.
And so I've logged in as the resource owner. And this was key. This was like a really important part because from a security perspective, we don't want non-admins having access to the admin portal in any way. And so from a JumpCloud perspective, we felt like it was really important, and we confirmed this with our customers, that they want their end users to go to the user portal to make these decisions. They don't want them to have a different experience in the admin portal. And so that was a key component that we felt like we needed to go do. I'm not going to do anything with this Google Workspace one because I want to show you what that looks like from an admin's perspective. And so we're just going to leave that one alone for right now. But anything you want to talk about here, Chase, in terms of the non-admin approver or
I
any?
think that's really helpful. And I think to your point, right, in terms of how we want to do it, making sure that it's accessible from all those different elements. We had a question come in, right, in terms of like notification emails. Not everyone's all good at email, right? And so it's like, since it's ours, like, how do we want to nudge people? Should we just scream at them very loudly? Um,
Hold that question because
okay,
I'm,
we'll
I'm
come
gonna
back to
I'm
that
gonna
question.
circle back and talk about some different options that we have,
Yeah.
and then some things we're working on in the roadmap that could make that situation better.
Okay,
So,
perfect. Because I think
yep.
the other element here too is, again, going beyond just SSO and other pieces. Like I
Mhm.
think you can get pretty customized and essentially start to lean on JumpCloud, right, as terms and approval stuff, right? So it could
Yep.
be, hey, instead of an actual application, could be a bookmark to something, and that just shows an approval flow of like, yes, we want to do that. And I think it helps too from the perspective of, hey, we want to make sure that everyone has access to all the things. And
Mhm.
we also don't want to spend a bazillion dollars in unused SaaS applications or kind of anything else, right? And so I think you can start to leverage both from a communication side, but then also from a money saving side, right? And there's kind of having people think about it a little bit differently, and making sure that that's all tracked. So I think that it opens it up for a lot of interest into stuffs.
Yep. Nope. You're on it. Okay. Let's hop back over to the admin portal. And let's go back over to the access requests main page. Uh, get out of that. So when I first come to this page, where I was before was approval flows. That's where you go configure a flow in terms of what you want that to look like. But there's also a request queue tab. And there's two subtabs underneath there. There's one called administrator and there's one called others. The administrator tab is where the administrator makes decisions for requests that they are part of the approval flow as an administrator. If
Okay.
they're a name, let's say that you've named an administrator as a resource owner, they're going to have to go make that approval decision over in the user portal because they're making that decision in the context as a resource owner, not as an administrator. And I know that sounds kind of funky, but we needed to keep that separation of from a security perspective and make sure that we wanted to give customers a lot of flexibility in how they could use resource owner. They could use it for anyone in the directory, remember, including administrators. And if they want to name an administrator, that named administrator would make that decision over in the user portal. But if you've just selected administrator as the approver, they're going to make those decisions here. And so this is right now the reason you don't see anything in there is because there's nothing pending an administrator to make an approval for. But if I take the filter and I say, hey, show me everything that's already been approved, you can see what this looks like. Let me zoom out a little bit, make it a little bit easier for you. And so you can kind of see, you can drill into, okay, these are the ones that have been approved of in the past. This is how you're going to find previous request if you needed to within the UI. And I'll show you another way within the DI events as well. So this others tab, what it is it gives the administrator the ability to go find any request that they're not part of the approval flow for. So, like, let's say you've
Mm.
configured a request to be configured, the approval flow to go to like the requesters manager and then the resource owner, right? Which is what I've done here. And so it gives you the ability to see everything. It gives you the ability to access everything and touch everything. We call this God mode because it was very important that administrators had the power to go unblock anything if they needed to. And we even thought through, like, okay, if they do that, if they're going out of compliance, if they're going out of bounds from what the original configured approval flow was, we want them to take an extra step and tell us why. And so what I'm going to do here is, this was that other request that was in the user portal, if you remember, for that Google Workspace admin access, where the manager had already approved it and it was waiting on the resource owner to approve. And so I'm going to go in here and I'm going to expand it. And look, there's the manager who's already approved it. And now it's waiting on the resource owner to approve. Now, I'm this has been sitting there for a while, and you really need access, or let's say the resource owner is out of town, or the resource owner, something has
One of
gone
the Derek
amiss.
Johnsons took vacation and just
Right.
messed it all up.
Exactly. So I'm going to go ahead and grant you access. And then it's got an internal notes section. And so this is where you say overriding as resource owner is out of office for 2 weeks. Right. And so that way it's part of the compliance. It's part of the flow. It's part of the documentation that's associated with this. You are recognizing that you're going out of compliance for this request, but you need to provide a reason why. And so I'm going to click grant access. Right. Done and done. So now I know it showed it as pending, but it's just because it hasn't updated the table yet. But you can see if I expand it that it's been approved now, right? We're done with this one. So that was a key component, like to give that power to the administrators. And so we felt like that was an extremely important piece, to allow for nothing to get blocked, nothing to get paused, nothing to kind of stall out. So
Yeah,
anyway,
because I think there's a lot of different elements. I mean, you can think about time zones, right? Where say, hey, I need this urgently, but the other person is 12 hours away on the
yep,
other side of the world. Or then there's two. I think a couple questions come through is like, kind of what things would if it's broken, kind of how we do that. So just making sure you have the visibility,
right,
because guess what? Life, like software, has a tendency to change, or we kind of switch things from modes, or people are kind of in and out between some of those different things. So I think it does help from let's make sure that the system is constantly cleansed from
yes.
making sure that that is updated perspective.
And if let's say that manager has left the organization, like we were talking about earlier, and that request is sitting there, you now have the ability. This is how you would go in and you would say, okay, I'm either going to approve or decline that request, even though that manager is no longer there. So that kind of gives you a flavor for how that
Mhm.
works. The next thing I want to show is the directory insights piece. I won't spend very much time here. Let me expand my time horizon a bit. And so if I go in here to these event types, these are all access management. I'm just going to click through some of these, and you guys can see these are all access. These are all events that are associated with the request that we've been making right now. And so you can see this access request was processed successfully. Access provision request was successfully completed. So you can kind of see all of these different events that are here that you would have access to. And so we knew very strongly that, again, I said it in the very beginning, how important these are to the use case, right? Half the reason we're doing this is from a compliance perspective, to give you that tracking mechanism all the way through, from the time of the request to the multi-step approval to the reasons why. All of that is documented, and you've got it all in one place. So that then takes us to one of the previous questions, was, well, what about like different notification methods, and how you guys think about customers being able to leverage, how do we consume these DI events in a more elegant way? And
Right.
so one of the things that we knew was extremely important in the very beginning of access request was we knew that customers were going to want to integrate this into ticketing systems, as an example. Here at
Mhm.
JumpCloud, we use Jira as our ticketing system, and from a compliance standpoint, is our single source of truth. And so we knew that there were a lot of customers like that where they would want to be able to integrate their events being generated out of access requests into other tools, right? And so not just ticketing systems, but let's say you wanted to put it into a SIEM for some reason, or you had a communication tool or whatever, right? But we wanted to give you that flexibility. And so one of the things that we did, there's a settings section over here to the right within access requests. And if you go down here, we have created, and we talked about this yesterday in the roadmap webinar as well. There is now a webhook service, and we're using that webhook service for multiple use cases. Access request is one of them. Another one is alerting, right? And so what this does is it allows you to select a channel that you've already pre-configured. You configure the webhook channels over in the main settings section. Um, but you can see I already have some of these kind of set up. And what you do is you say, okay, for this channel, this webhook channel, I want to associate these events to that webhook channel, right? And so we've even created an article, a support article to help you, if like for Jira specifically, because we know Jira can be kind of challenging sometimes from an integration standpoint, of how to set up the webhook service with a Jira account. And
Yeah.
so think beyond just access request and alerting. There's a lot of capability with this webhook service, right? This is just the beginning of what we want to go do. So,
And I think just to continue on, like there's a lot of optionality in terms of use cases. You can expand this right and beyond SSO into private things, do all the stuff, like just making sure you can have that. But I think the webhook piece is really nice because then it also kind of gives you the ability to, um, how noisy do you want to be like during this
yes.
access request? Like, hey, I just want to have this between a user versus, hey, I want the admin payload of everything. I want to see it all come through. I want like, you can kind of tune that a little bit to bit depending on what the resource is coming through, right? But then also too, like just how your organization thinks about it,
Yep.
who's going to be like looking behind it, and like if it's just you, kind of one person, you're like,
Yep.
great, I just want to stream. Versus like I need to have more information that I can share with the team. This is I'm going to use for my audit log. So this goes out to this channel. So that way, when I'm having these conversations every 6 months, like that's the channel that I'll go and open.
Yep.
So I think there's a lot of flexibility we could do.
So something else that we're working on, and I can't remember if this is on my roadmap slide or not, is we are building a proper Slack connector. A lot of our customers we know use
Mm,
Slack. A lot of our customers would love to get to the point where not only are they being notified in a Slack channel, but they can actually make decisions in Slack and then it communicate back into JumpCloud rather than having to come into the admin portal or come into the user portal. So that's something like we're cognizant of the friction point that we're potentially creating by making approvers come back to the user portal. And so we're in the process of building that Slack connector to facilitate that decision making process, not just the notification side of it. It will also work with alerting as well. And so, if you think about that use case, how valuable is that to have those alerts being sent to a
mhm.
particular channel in Slack? Once we get done with Slack, then we'll go tackle other communication tools like Microsoft Teams, Google Chat, other ones as well. That's the plan. And so, just to kind of give you guys an idea of what that looks like. So,
Perfect. I think we'll get all the
okay.
way down into TikTok, and so we can have, music videos generated by this, or we can hook it up with Gemini and get, images around it. But I think that component too, is like if you're getting into Slack, Teams, others, there's already existing workflows that a lot of people have built there. So it's like, how can you be additive to some of
Yes.
the orchestration, right, that you've already built across your organization and just making sure it all talks to each other.
We Many customers are leveraging many different tools for different purposes within their IT stack. And so our goal is to meet you with where you are and what tools you're comfortable with and where your employees do their work. And so that's the mentality that we have across a lot of these capabilities. So let's jump back over into here. And I want to talk about what's next. And so, one of the things I saw a question in chat around time, right? And how do we get to a place where, someone doesn't have permanent access based upon an access request taking place. We knew in the very beginning when we started tackling this use case that time to live was going to be an important component. It was just priority. It was just how we prioritize things. And so we are working on this as we speak. And I saw a demo of this yesterday. It was an internal demo that an engineer showed me, and it's coming along. Like, we're close. I expect that we'll be in a position early next year to put this in customers' hands. And so this essentially gives you the ability as the administrator to configure that request in terms of what times would you even make requestable. It could be a fixed amount of time where you say, hey, I just want it to be for 5 days at a time. And then once that 5 days expires, that user no longer is a member of that user group. Therefore, they no longer have the access that they've been granted access to. You would also have the ability to give optionality to the requester in terms of what, they could pick 1 day, they could pick 5 days, they could pick 10 days, and so on and so on and so on. And so we give you full control over what is the time component that that the requester can request. And then once that approval takes place, it could be auto approved. It could go through an approval flow. But once that approval takes place, access is granted, and then user group membership ends when the time ends. It's as simple as that. And so the user is no longer a member of that group and therefore no longer has access. So we know how important this is to IGA, to identity governance and administration. We didn't want to be in this world where we have this permanent access forever. And so this was something that we always knew we were going to go build. It was just a matter of timing in which we were to go build it. So
I think that's, to your point, I think kind of crucial for 2 points. One, it helps set expectations for approvers and other things. It's like, don't lollygag on this, right? People are waiting. You maybe have a little bit of a grace cycle, but if you have something come over the weekend or, whatever that might be. But then to your second point, I think as we think about larger IGA stories or kind of, okay, as we just walked through, Salesforce admin access. A lot of people may or may not see that as a critical app. I do, because guess what? That's where all your customer data is and your comms and, financial stuff. Like, there's so much that, if been granted admin access into some of those different types of applications, could be very interesting, right? Especially in the wrong hands. So I think it's really helpful for then you can start to monitor, like, okay, you came in for a little bit, we denied that. And I think too, honestly, it just helps with scope creep a lot. And not to say that one or more of the Derek Johnsons aren't nefarious, right? But just you access 100% of the time, you only use it for 5%. Now you're kind of an overscoped identity. If you get compromised or kind of anything else like that, that could have been prevented, be basically just time bound.
And if you think about the pillars of IGA, right, in terms of user lifecycle management and the reporting, and think about all of the things that JumpCloud can already do in the context of IGA, and access request was a critical component that needed to be added. And that's the approach that we took. We knew that we needed to go build this access request capability as part of an IGA story. And the time to live and the just-in-time access that it enables was a critical component of that those IGA pillars. And so this really starts to get us to when we're never going to go create a full kind of enterprise level IGA type thing that a lot of customers are used to when you hear the term IGA. But when you think about what most customers need from an identity governance and administration perspective, this really starts to check the box and really starts to get us into a place where when people think about JumpCloud and they think about identity governance and administration, they start to recognize that all of these pieces are there. And this is something that I'm going to talk a lot about at JumpCloud Land. Like, we'll come in and do a whole nother deep dive on IGA. So a couple other things that are coming next year is 2 of the most commonly requested features that we hear about. One is a self-serve request for admin sudo on a device. You can see that this access request foundation, if you will, is a great starting point. And we're going to work on building you or giving you the ability to configure flows that are based around this self-serve request for admin sudo on a device. And now that we've got the time to live component, or we will have the time to live component, think about how important that is in that use case. That you want to grant someone admin sudo privileges on their device, you want it to expire after a period of time and then revert back. And so that's the way that'll work. And then the other piece is self-serve request for software management on a device. This one might look a little bit different in the beginning. It may not have an approval flow associated with it, but giving you the ability to get to a point where you enable your end users to self-serve, putting particular pieces of software and managing software on their device. So lots of cool
Yeah.
stuff coming in this context.
Yeah, that will be super helpful. I think especially, for us living in Mac land that, need admin capabilities to update certain applications that only, have some of those different pieces, giving me just enough time to update those apps versus, spin up a crypto farm, and all the other fun things that you could start to do.
Yeah.
And then I think on the software management too, this becomes more interesting as you think about so much of our world now is SaaS, SSO kind of based, kind of like a lot of the work is being done through the browser. But there's still some heavy hitting apps in terms, all the Adobe suites, some of the CADs of the world, kind of the other elements where you do need that, or you want to walk down certain device locations or kind of
Yeah.
certain areas on what that looks like. And I think also too, just making sure that users really understand like, here's the good baseline. But then if it's productivity apps or if there's something else. And then two, think about a lot of organizations that want to manage, but then also monitor AI
Mm-hmm.
usage, right? And so like I think there's going to be a lot that will still come through the browser, but we're expecting more and more of that to kind of filter down into the device layer. And so making sure that we have that kind of ahead of time, I think will be really helpful.
Yep. Yep. Nope. Totally makes sense. Okay, the last slide I have is really, you might ask yourself, well, hey, JumpCloud, you've built this access request thing now, and you also acquired a company called Vault One that has a wonderful PAM solution that's being integrated into JumpCloud. And so one of the things that we wanted to talk a little bit about is when should you think about each of those things, right? And if you
Mhm.
think about access requests, and Chase, jump in here, like once I set this up and kind of give me your perspective. But the way that I like to think about access requests from an IGA standpoint is it's about all users, easy self-serve access to everyday resources, right? And putting some compliance and efficiency capabilities around it. That's the way I think about access requests. When I think about PAM, I'm thinking about, man, I want to secure my most critical assets, which is access to these capabilities, these features, these resources, but I want to put a lot of control around it, and I don't want to give everyone the ability to request access or elevate into a PAM type of a resource. And so when we think about these at JumpCloud, we think about them in these two contexts. IGA, access request, everyday user, everyday resources. Vault One PAM, we think about it from a most critical assets and a smaller group of people that have access to even be able to make a request or to get access to these resources. So talk to me a little bit about how you think. Is that kind of consistent with the way you think about it?
I think so, and I think the mental model that I use and kind of chat with customers about kind of how we think about these things is that it's kind of like what's your daily driver, and then what is something else that you need to take out for a spin every once in a while, and it's really important. And the way that I look at it is like access requests. It's I don't want to say more passive, but it is I need to, it's Friday afternoon. I need to do some things. Please help me like accelerate this. Versus Pam, and one of the elements that we, first the reason why we kind of acquired them is they have a lot of unique capabilities that I'd say are both available in traditional PAM stuff. Because a lot of it is like I want to see it, right? I want a recorded session. I want to know
Yes.
what one of the Derek Johnsons have been up to. But then there's a lot more controls when you lock it down, right? So we also have the ability in Vault One to manage how you get in and interact within databases, what commands you can actually not run. And they also have, I like to call it private browser, but remote browser isolation, where you can actually lock down truly what the user can do within a browser session. And so the example I'd hear is like, how much do you trust your contractors, right? And so you might have some folks coming in, oh, yep, that's great. Um, you know, the type of access that they're not really granting into could be more seasonal work, right? You just really want to enable that versus, hey, we're bringing the SecOps team. We want to do something,
Yeah.
but we want to make sure that if they're touching our valuable stuff, we understand what was happening, what was the sequence of events, kind of other pieces. And so I think there is an escalation in terms of how you want to manage that and how you want to have access requests. In the golden age, right, the ideal scenario is you just pay them for everything, right? We'll kind of do that
Yeah.
across that. But there is a heavy, let's say, mental admin load when we think about those things. Like you don't need to sit there and watch 10 hours of people trying to get into Figma, right? But there could be other sessions where, depending on where you're working across different teams, that takes higher priority. And I think a lot of this that we wanted to look at is not everyone needs different levels of visibility. Some need a ton, some just need great, here's kind of other elements. And then some need to run the gambit, right? Depending on the complexity of their organization, especially as we talk to a lot of customers that are growing and we'll have new pains and we'll have new other areas that we want to expand into. So that way you can actually map kind of your authentication with your growth and the
Mhm.
controls that we need at different times. Like you might not need all this stuff when you are 20 people and hanging out and kind of trying to get the concept off the ground. But now that you're scaling maybe into a couple hundred people, there's a little bit more. People are taking more vacations. Hey, we want to, like the complexity of communication continues to grow and scale across that. And so I think that's one of the bigger elements of like why you kind of see it side by side is get both options, right? Because you
Yeah.
can have that ability depending on what you need.
But something that we're talking about right now that kind of that accentuates even more what you're saying is, so if you remember on the previous slide, that self-service request for admin sudo on a device,
Mm-hmm.
you can make the argument that that's a privileged access management use case, right? You're giving someone a privileged access on their device. And we've been getting a lot of questions from customers of, hey, can you give me better logging? I want to know what that user's doing when they're in an elevated privilege on a device. Or I might want to know for some devices, but others I don't care about. And so one of the things that we're talking about in the context of building this capability is starting to take some of those PAM solutions or those PAM capabilities around screen capture and recordings and those kinds of things, and potentially folding it into that elevated privilege on a device
Mm-hmm.
experience. And so that's something that we're talking about as well. So cool.
Perfect.
Well, Chase, that was all I wanted to cover. I know
Well, that was a lot, and that was the
we
whole
talked for
purpose
a
of
long
it. I mean,
time.
so thanks for everyone. I mean, diving in, what now, 50 minutes of access requests and other pieces, but that's really kind of why we want to have some of these different sessions to beat up all the Derek Johnsons on his thinking, how we approach this, why are some of the different nuances, some of the different best practices that we have. Again, thinking through that kind of three-tiered model of making sure you're in the right department, what is the approver workflow, the granularity of groups, right? That's kind of, let's make that a thing, so that we can start to manage and scope out a lot of those other pieces. And then also too, thank you for walking through a little bit more of the roadmap, how we're going to be thinking about notifications. What is this going to look like? Because as you can imagine, you can build in a lot more interesting use cases just outside of app access, that will be coming soon. So I think that will be really nice as we start to have this kind of motion. You can start to think of JumpCloud as your source of truth, not only for managing identities, but like also at the granular level, right? And kind of what that looks like and making sure that you have that audit trail. So thank you so much for hopping in and kind of walking us all through that and answering a lot of the different questions that we have, along the time. And then two, I will say this goes kind of all the other pieces. All this was built with customer feedback, right? And so if you're
Yes.
listening and be like, hey, I want to be part of the next thing, let's go bug Derek. Like there's a lot of things on the roadmap. We'd love to get your feedback in terms of if there's different use cases, requests, other pieces that we want to incorporate as we continue to release and then also enhance a lot of the upcoming products. So we'd love to chat with you. You don't have to wait for once a month to come on these other different pieces. Please reach out and we'd love to have that conversation.
Absolutely. And Chase, thanks for letting me come in and talk so much. I like to talk, so that's one of the reasons we take so long. But everybody should come join JumpCloud Land. Come join us for JumpCloud Land because it's going to be a lot of fun, and we're going to have some great topics, and we're going to go even deeper than what we've done today on some of these things. So,
Yeah, absolutely. It should be a great time. Thank you, everyone, again. Hope you have a great rest of your week and week ahead. And we'll catch you on the next one.
perfect. Thanks, everybody.